Hello and welcome to the PPP Forgiveness Instructional webinar for ABB. My name is John Sweisberger. I'm a partner at Armanino in the Business Outsourcing Services practice. And today I'm joined by John Kogan, a director in our Business Outsourcing Services practice, and Matt Petrosky, who's a director in our tax practice. Today, we're going to cover a great deal of information. We urge you to listen closely, but fortunately, this is all being recorded so that you'll be able to go back through it at any point should you have any questions. Okay, so 3 things that we want to cover today. First, we want to make sure that you're up to speed with the current information as it relates to the various rules and regulations associated with the PPP forgiveness program. There's been a bunch of changes since our last webinar. We want to talk through those and make sure you're completely in the know on everything that's been happening with this program as it constantly changes. The second thing we want to do is walk you through the steps that you'll go through in the process to forgiveness, help you understand the timeline you have for applying and kind of what's going to happen when, and help you navigate that process as smoothly and as efficiently as possible. And then the third piece that we're going to go through is a deep dive into the calculation model that we'll be providing to you, as well as helpful resources that will enable you to utilize that model in the most efficient and best manner possible. And again, our goal through all of this is to help you through the process so that it is as streamlined and as easy for you as possible, and so that you can maximize the forgiveness that you should be earning. All right, so let's start with kind of the key PPP forgiveness regulation updates. There's several of them, and for this, I'm going to turn to Matt Petrosky. Matt?
Great. Thanks, John. So obviously, we continue to have changes coming about. We've had a few key forgiveness changes since the last time we spoke, many related to the Flexibility Act that was passed by Congress and signed by the President. One new thing that has come from the SBA is a new form. So the easy form is available for individuals who are self-employed, sole proprietors, or any independent contractors with no employees at the time of applying and in the basis of the loan application, or any businesses with no salary reductions and no FTE reductions from 1/1/20 through the end of the covered period. And also any businesses with no salary reductions and an ability to return to the pre-215 activity throughout the covered period due to the government restrictions. And I'll talk about that with the new FTE reduction safe harbor. So if you look at that third point is that there was an inability to return to the pre-215 activity throughout the covered period due to government restrictions using Health and Human Services, the Centers for Disease Control, and OSHA guidance as well. So essentially, any FTE reductions due to those government restrictions, if your business could not operate the same as the pre-215 activity due to the regulations such as social distancing, if you're a restaurant and you can only operate at 50% capacity, any reductions in FTE due to that is a new safe harbor and something that individuals and organizations can take advantage of it.
Hey, Matt, let me ask you a quick question about
Sure.
that before we keep going. So those are all federal agencies, HHS, CDC, and OSHA. An awful lot of the requirements that came out for closing down businesses or enforcing social distancing rules and sanitation rules were issued by state, county, or local governments. How do those two play together?
Well, I think many of the states were in a sense following the CDC guidance. I think to the extent that those local regulations are essentially trying to further and comply with HHS or CDC guidance, that should be sufficient as well.
Right. So the documentation that you're going to need to be able to claim that safe harbor or to be able to use the easy form is going to require you to have evidence from your local government, if that's who created the challenge for you in terms of being able to return to your pre-Feb 15 activity. has to rely in some part on those federal restrictions.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
One new thing that I know we had previously, I think it was pretty clear that you had 8 weeks, you had 24 weeks. Those were the covered periods. Something that is new that has come out is you are now able to file your application when the PPP money runs out. So if you've spent all your money in 12 weeks, you can file after that 12 weeks. And then finally, the maximum compensation for an individual during the 24-week covered period is 46,154. So that's an extension of the 15283 that is still the cap for the 8-week period.
Great, thanks. Let's go ahead and dive in on a few questions around that, Matt, then, because certainly there's a lot of uncertainty as it relates to so many things around this program. So let me hit the first question on these new rules, and that is this. If I choose 24 weeks as my covered period, but I file for forgiveness before then, do I run any risks associated with my forgiveness?
Well, I think if you look at how a lot of the guidance is, it's really geared towards the 24 weeks, but you obviously can file. The example that they give does tell you that you will need to extrapolate any reduction in salary. So this is the 25% reduction. It is silent as to FTE calcs. And so at this point, the question is, can you just run your FTE calc through the point where you file, which seems reasonable at this point, but I think there may be a risk. Obviously, if the SBA does come out with further guidance, but obviously it is allowable.
Okay, great. So here's the second question, which kind of plays off of the example you just gave. If I run out of the PPP money after 12 weeks and I decide that's when I'm going to file for my forgiveness, since I can now do it earlier, does that change the maximum compensation per employee that I can get credit for?
So the answer is you will get more than the 15,000 of the 8-week period. The one big question is, well, what does this mean from the cap if I'm essentially I've elected the 24-week covered period by going beyond the 8. But does that mean I get to use 46,154 per employee, which would allow you really to get more than what should be on that 100,000? I'd say at this point, given where we've seen the SBA go, it's clear that there's only those two options, but that is not the intent, to be able to squeeze 46,000 per individual compensation in there. So I think we likely will see some guidance coming out from the SBA on this. I would expect it to match sort of a weekly basis. There is no guidance currently on point, but just kind of looking to the spirit of the legislation and really that it was not intended for individual organizations to be able to push the envelope there.
Yeah, exactly. Repeatedly in various guidance that they've issued, they have talked about how the intent was not to create windfalls. That would certainly be a windfall if it were to be left in that open loophole, but we fully expect that they will try to close that loophole, so stay tuned for that. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Speaking of windfalls, there's a lot of that discussion was around windfalls for owners. So as an owner, can I now pay myself the $46,154 maximum?
The answer is no. So the 8-week maximum is 15,385, and the 24-week maximum is 28. I believe 835. So it's
No,
essentially
let's be clear on that one. It's
sure.
20,833.
Yes.
Right.
So essentially what it is 850 seconds of your Schedule C, and this, which is the 8-week period, the 24-week period, which be 2.5 months of your Schedule C. So it's all based on the net income of your Schedule C.
And to be clear, that's your 2019 Schedule C, not your 2018, even if you haven't filed it yet, right?
Correct.
All right, great. All right, thanks, Matt. Next question. Do I have to wait until the end of the year to know if I qualify for safe harbor from both the salary and the FTE reduction factors?
The answer is until you file it's 1231. We think at this point, once you file, that's likely where the FTE reduction could be, but there is no guidance out there. The wage, the 25%, it's clear that you would have to extrapolate that out to the 24 weeks.
Correct. But if you want the safe harbor on that, it is as of the date that you apply, unless you apply after
Mhm.
December 31st, right?
Correct.
Great. All right, last question on this, then we'll dive into the process a little bit. So this has come up time and time and time again from people asking, listen, can I apply the reduction factors against my total payroll cost because I spent more in payroll than what my total loan was? So for example, I got a loan for 200,000 and I spent $300,000 in payroll during the covered period, so 100,000 more than my loan amount, and I had a reduction factor of 25%. Can I apply that against the full $300,000 of payroll or not?
This is a clear no, and we've definitely sought confirmation and received it from the SBA that you cannot get around the reduction factors by just spending more money over the 24-week period.
All right, well, that was clear and unambiguous. It does sort of follow that it would be a little bit odd to try to claim forgiveness on the money that you already had that you spent of your own money. So the government's asking about your how you spent their money, not how you spent your own money. So let's be clear on that one, and hopefully nobody tries to go down that path, because it's not likely to end real well once it goes through the review process. Okay, so speaking of the review process and the forgiveness process, let's kind of walk you through what's to come for you as you go through the next period of time trying to get your forgiveness. And we're going to start at the end. What is the output of all of this going to look like for you? As Matt was describing, there are now two paths. There's the what we'll call standard filing path, which is what you see on the left here, which is the application form 3508 accompanied by a Schedule A. That's for standard filers. And for those of you who qualify for the easy form, it's what you see here on the right. Forgiveness application form 3508 EZ, which you can see is quite a bit shorter than the other form. And again, there's restrictions certainly, and there are very stiff tests around who actually can apply using the EZ form. So we expect the majority of people will go down the standard form 3508 and Schedule A path. Now, for ABB borrowers, there are going to be two tools that'll walk you through this process. The first is what you see on the left, which is a forgiveness application workflow and portal. And we're going to give you a chapter and verse here in a moment on exactly how that works. And the second is the forgiveness calculation model, again, only for the non-easy form or standard form filers. And we'll also walk you through that in great detail here shortly. Okay, so let's start with the one on the left, the forgiveness application workflow and portal. And there's a lot of great features about this. One, you get into it with one click. It takes you right to it. It's very secure. There's a multi-factor authentication, meaning you're going to have to be texted a security code after you've logged in and complete the login process by entering that security code. It is a left to right process, meaning you cannot move from one stage to the next until you've completed the stage that you're in. So it is very much a workflow that will take you step by step by step through the process. It saves as you go, and there are certain buttons as well for you to make sure you're comfortable that you can save and continue with those easy navigation buttons found at the bottom of each page. There will be both a training video and a quick reference navigation guide that will be coming out shortly for you as well. But what you see here is kind of two different paths or workflows through the process. You see the easy form on the top, and you see the standard form on the bottom, which has a couple of other steps that the easy form does not have. So there's reasons for all that, of course, but let's start with the easy form for those of you fortunate enough to be able to use that process. So here's what that workflow looks like. It starts with a series of instructions, which are informational only, moves you then on into application basics. And much of this will be pre-populated for you. So this is things like your business name that the loan is held under, the loan number, the SBA's loan number, the or funding amount and the date of the funding, whether there was an idle advance and things like that. The basic information that the bank already has because that was what was originally provided at the time of the loan origination. So we'll pre-populate all of that so that you don't have to worry about, well, how much exactly was my loan, like down to the dollar, because it does matter. It does need to match. And as well, it will avoid the problem of maybe transposing a number and a loan number and things like that, real easy things that can create problems later on. So all that gets pre-populated, but there's a number of other things that are in there as well. That leads you then into the actual forgiveness application, the ability to upload supporting files, review and sign, and there's a help function as well. So let's walk through each of those steps for you, beginning with the instructions. You will be emailed soon a unique link. It will be specific to you to access the portal, and it will take you directly to your own loan information. Please don't lose this. This is extremely important because this is the link you have. It is not intended to be widely shared or anything else, but it will come to you in an email. You're going to want to make sure that you keep track of that. As I said, you'll click into that link to take you straight to the portal, which will give you a button that says, cleverly, start the PPP forgiveness process, which then takes you into that multi-factor authentication where you'll add your cell number, enter the secure access code that you're texted, and then you'll get the instructions. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Let's move to the next step, which is the application basics. All right, so in this step of the workflow, I talked about those pre-populated fields. We want to make sure that you review those, make sure they're accurate. It was all done via a data upload, and it's always a possibility that there will be some conversion issue that might pop up. So please review those, make sure that they're accurate. If you do find anything that doesn't look right, please contact your relationship manager at ABB so that we can dive in on that and get that fixed if there's something that needs to be corrected. There are several fields that are not pre-populated. Those will be in white. Those are for you to do data entry. Those that are pre-populated or are calculated are in gray. So look for the white fields, fill those in, which will be things like, how many weeks did you elect in your covered period? Recall that in the application for forgiveness, there is a request for the number of employees that you had at the time you applied for the loan and at the time of forgiveness application. That was not information that was required when you applied for the loan itself. So you're going to have to fill those fields in. There's a handful of those. And then comes probably the most important part of the application basics, which is determining whether you're going to be eligible to use the easy application or whether you're going to have to go through the standard form process. So there's a series of questions, which we'll show you in just a second. Once you've completed all of this page, click Save and Continue, and you'll be able to move on to the next step. But before we do that, I want to make sure you understand kind of what you're going to be seeing in this application basics work step as it relates to determining your eligibility for the EZ form. So in this red highlighted box, there's this question: are you eligible to use the EZ application? And that basically starts with the first criterion of the EZ application, which is the borrower is a self-employed individual, independent contractor, or sole proprietor who had no employees at the time of the loan application and did not include any employee salaries when you calculated your average monthly payroll for purposes of getting your loan. So no employees in 2019 and no employees at the time you applied for the loan. So you click on that little down arrow that you see in that blank box, and that will give you a choice of no or yes. Okay, and depending on your answer, it's going to carry you on down through here. So here's a screenshot example of the 3 different criteria for using the easy application. The first one we already answered no. The second one, which was no salary reduction factor, that's part A, which has a no next to it, and no essentially FTE reduction factor, we answered no to that as well. That opens up then the third criterion, which required a yes and a yes in order to be eligible to use it. So that was no salary reduction factor, criterion 3A, and criterion 3B, which was this inability to operate during the covered period at the same level of business activity as before February 15th based on these federal guidelines. And keep in mind that that inability to return to prior operating levels is in effect from that date all the way through till the end of your covered period. It does not mean that at a point in time I was unable to, but then I regained my ability to. It means that throughout the covered period I was unable to. Okay, so in our example here, both of those are yeses, which then takes you down to this bottom, hey, congratulations, you're eligible to use the easy application. Do you want to? And again, you choose a yes or a no. Okay, so let's assume that you said yes. That takes you on down then into the rest of the workflow. There's your examples, exactly what I was talking about. So this takes you now down into the rest of the process. So let's move from the application basics into forgiveness, okay? And so here what you'll do is enter your payroll costs and your non-payroll costs. Remember, the easy form is pretty simple. There's really only 4 data points that you have to enter, which is my 4 main categories of spend. How much did I spend in each? We don't have to go through any of those calculations regarding reduction factors or any of the look back periods or any of that other stuff. It's just how much did you spend in the 4 categories. That will load up lines 5 through 7 in the form, which is potential forgiveness amounts, and your final requested forgiveness amount will get automatically determined in line 8. So you enter lines 1 through 4, lines 5 through 8 get entered automatically based on what you entered. You click save and continue, and now you'll move on into the supporting files. And that is where you will upload the rest of your documentation. You can see it here that you will have a series of boxes. Some will be, well, they'll all be color-coded red to begin with. Those are required documents that you're going to need to upload. So you do it via a simple drag and drop, or you can navigate through a browse feature as well, whichever is easier for you. But you simply drag it into the box and drop it in there. Once it's in, that box will turn from red to green. You'll know that you've completed what you need to do. So until all of your boxes are green, meaning they hold a supporting document, you cannot continue. But assuming that you have, at that point, filled every box in, you click save and continue, and it takes you to the final step, which is review and sign. And here you wait, okay? Because this is the step, once we've completed the supporting files, this is the step where you will not actually have submitted to the bank. You will be under bank review at this point. So the bank will be going through all of the data in your easy form application, going through the supporting documents. If in fact there are some errors that are found or expenses that are disallowed because they're outside the rules of the program, you may get directed back 2 steps to the forgiveness step, which is, recall, where you just entered your spend data and instructed the correct numbers to put into that so that your application ultimately matches that which you'll be forgiven for. So if you have to go through that step, you'll update the forgiveness application, proceed through supporting files, click save and continue, and finally you will be at the step where You can certify in the, I think there are 10 boxes in the easy form that you have to certify, and sign your application, submit to the bank, and you're done. Okay, so just to refresh you on this, you can't use the easy form process unless you meet one of these 3 criteria and can support it in the event that the SBA decides they want to audit your forgiveness and loan applications. So those 3 criteria again are you're self-employed or independent contractor or sole proprietor, had no employees at the time you applied for the loan, and no employee costs in the amount that you were applying for, meaning it was basically you and you alone. So that may fit some of you, probably won't fit most of you. Second criterion, again, you had no salary or FTE reductions since the beginning of the year. And we have talked about this a little bit more earlier, but there is yet no specific guidance on exactly what qualifies as a reduction in employees or a reduction in average hours paid between January 1st and the end of the covered period. Okay, that's the specific language, but what we're comparing the average against is not yet actually stated. What does it mean to have a reduction in employees? If somebody leaves, resigns and leaves the firm, and it takes you 3 weeks to get that position backfilled, does that count as a reduction during that one pay period? Unclear. So that may be a very, very stiff test. And then again, the third test was the no salary reduction since the first of the year and unable to return to that pre-215 business activity due to those federal requirements. Those are both pretty stiff tests, we believe. So if you cannot certify that and provide supporting documentation that you qualify, you're not allowed to use the easy form. Okay? So for the rest of you, let's go through what the standard form process is. The first 2 pages are the same. The instructions and the application basics are the same, but there are 2 new things that are put in called the worksheets step and the Schedule A step. Okay, and your forgiveness calculation model happens in that worksheet step. So let's kind of walk you through what this all looks like, okay? So we've kind of, as I said, instructions and application basics are one and the same compared to the easy form, but that's where the fork in the road happens. Remember, there was that series of questions you needed to answer as to whether you were eligible to use easy or not. If you are not, you take this fork here, which is the worksheets page where you'll download the loan forgiveness calculation model, complete it, and re-upload it. What does that look like? Okay, so you're going to see down near the bottom of the worksheets step, the screen that looks something like this that has some radio buttons at the top, build using worksheet wizard, or upload Excel/PDF documents, or skip this step, okay? What you want to do is go past that to the bank forms, where we will have a link to the Armanino forgiveness calculation model, and you'll be able to download it there. We will also have the calculation model loaded up on the ABB website, and you'll be able to download it from there. It's an either or. It's the same model, whichever path is easier for you. Don't select any of those radio buttons at the top. It takes you down a completely different path, but we aren't able to actually disable those so far as we know. So select the green one, don't select the red one. Okay, so that's sort of step 1. That will download the model to your computer once you've completed it, and we'll go through how to do that. Return to this page to upload the file back to the portal, and then click this Save and Continue button that you see in the lower right corner. So that's the basics of the worksheet step, which will lead you then into Schedule A. Okay, so this step also is not in the easy form because the easy form doesn't have a Schedule A. So here, you're going to enter data in the fields based on what the forgiveness calculation model says in tab 8. And we'll go through all of this for you in great detail here shortly. So I'm just trying to give you an overview at the moment. But there'll be a bunch of information that's in tab 8 that will tell you what to put into Schedule A. there is a possibility, a fairly significant possibility, that the model will produce some error statements. That is not an error in the model. It merely reflects an older version of Excel that you may be using. Certainly not all borrowers are on the exact same version of Excel, but this is written in the most current version, and some older versions of Excel will struggle to try to execute commands that it just doesn't recognize because it's from a later version of Excel. So we're prepared for that. Don't worry about it. If it happens, you'll be told what to do, which is basically this: put a 0 in each field in this Schedule A work step in the workflow on the portal. And you'll come back to this step a little bit later after we've done the review, but we can't do the review until you've gotten through this step. Okay, I hope that was clear. We'll give you some better examples as we go through this in a little bit more detail here. So save and continue there and move on into the forgiveness workflow step, where you'll enter your non-payroll costs for mortgage obligations, rent or lease payments, and utility payments in lines 2, 3, and 4. And again, the tab 8 in the Armanino model will tell you exactly what to put in there. Click save and continue, and now we're back to where we would have been in the EZ model, which is the supporting files. Same exact approach. Fill in the red boxes with a document through a drag and drop. That uploads them and turns the box into green. Once you've completed each of those, you're now able to click save and continue to move to the final step. And again, we go back to the wait step. So this is where the review happens of the application, the calculation model, and the supporting documents. And again, as I said back in the Schedule A step, you may be sent back to that step to put new numbers in, either because you had an older version of Excel and we needed to get you the right numbers, or because we had some disallowed expenses or errors, or both of the above. So again, you'd kind of go right back through the process, get through the supporting files, click save and continue. Those files will all be there. You won't have to do it over again. This is just a function of getting the right numbers into your application. And then finally, you'll certify where appropriate and sign your forgiveness application and click the magic button, Submit to Bank, which is kind of the final step you have to do, other than wait for your forgiveness letter coming back from the bank that you can rely on. Okay, so that's an overview of the process from the steps that you're going to go through. Let's take a look now at what that means in terms of a timeline. Okay, so first, you're going to be getting an email shortly from ABB that will alert you to the forgiveness model being available, as well as a bunch of other supporting materials that you'll be able to download. Look for that email, and then once you've got it and you've downloaded the model, work through the forgiveness model, pull all the data together that you need and get that loaded into the model, get all your backup information, and then in about mid-July, the portal will be open for you to upload all of your data that supports the model, all of the documents, and remember that needs to include your Q2 Form 941 payroll report. So that generally won't become available till roughly mid-July anyway. So we're trying to time it in around that. Okay, once that's been uploaded, we'll be able to pick up your complete file. And again, it needs to have all of the supporting documentation, not just some of it. So we'll be able to pick all of that up and do the review that needs to be done of the data that you input against the supporting documentation. Now remember that there is the possibility of you having to go through a second step depending on the version of Excel that you have, or if there are some expenses that were originally loaded in that need to be disallowed, or errors that were made. So we're allowing for this secondary step here, which is in the event that you had to either make changes, or you were in an older version of Excel and had some errors coming out of the model itself, we will create a PDF replica of Schedule A for you based on the data net of the various adjustments. We'll put that up on the portal and send you an email to let you know it's there, so that you can then download that replica Schedule A, go back into the portal, and you'll be able to move to the Schedule A worksheet in the portal's workflow steps. There, you'll enter the data that was on that replica Schedule A, and that will automatically populate your forgiveness application, at which point you'll be able to certify, sign, and save the final forgiveness application along with Schedule A in the portal. Those two steps to the left may not be necessary if you're on a current version of Excel and there were either no errors or no disallowances coming out of the review process, in which case we'll skip those two if needed steps and let you go directly to the certify, sign, and save in the portal. And at that point, your job is done. We'll take a quick look at that final forgiveness application to make sure you've initialed all the places you needed to initial, signed it, and didn't transpose any numbers or things like that. The bank will complete its review process and then convey to you a final forgiveness decision and also pass that on to the SBA so that the SBA process can begin and we can get you on your way to being completely forgiven, or as much as you've earned anyway, through this process, and you can put your PPP loan woes behind you. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of the process that you're going to go through. I'd now like to dive into the calculation model itself for those people who are going to be filing the standard form and not the easy form. And for that, let me bring in John Cogan, who has spent literally hundreds of hours building this model that we've tried to design to make it as easy as possible for you to be able to get all of the forgiveness that you should be getting by virtue of you not having to worry about all of those calculations and look back periods and things like that. So John, let me turn it over to you to walk everybody through the model you've built.
Thanks so much, John. Happy to be here. All right, a few high-level items here. First, your job is primarily to enter data in this model. The calculations will all happen in the background. So your focus should be having your documentation ready so that you can be as efficient as possible. And I would say simply be cautious with entering data. If you happen to miskey some elements, then that could cause some troubles for you. So to the extent that you could have your data available perhaps in Excel so that you can copy and paste into this model, that might make sense. It might not be available depending on what data you're able to collect and in what format from your payroll provider, but that might help reducing errors. Speaking of payroll providers, please do not attempt to use summary report data provided by third-party payroll providers. We've looked at dozens of these reports. None of them have actually been correct, and they are unfortunately opaque. You cannot tell what calculations they're doing on your behalf. So you will need to rely on the payroll providers to provide raw basic pay information, person by person, payroll by payroll. Those are okay. But the summary level reports that have been put together by payroll companies large and small, we cannot tell how accurate they are because all the calculations are hidden, and therefore we suggest you simply don't rely on them. Put in the low-level data that is requested in the model that you will have, and that will assure the best outcome. John already mentioned the Excel version limitation, so we don't need to dwell on that further here. So we've got some screenshots of a few of the tabs here. Let's go over some of the high-level information. First off, if you look at the tabs at the bottom here, you'll see the table of contents, which is the tab we're on, and then tab 0, which is instructions and general info, and then it runs right up through tab number 8, which is the forgiveness app data entry. So you have a number of means of getting yourself through this workbook. Number one, of course, you can just click on the tab names themselves, or in the table of contents here, you'll see that we have links to the tabs. You've got a description for each tab under column D there. So very easy to get around in this workbook. Next tab is the General Instructions tab. Note a couple of things here. First off, you can see that link in the top left. It says back to table of contents. All of the tabs have this link in the top left. You can just click there to get right back home to your table of contents. You'll also note here under item B, we are highlighting a cell note. That's that little red triangle at the top right corner of that cell as indicated there. And cell notes, if you just hover your mouse over them, they pop up a little message. And we've used cell notes pretty heavily in this model to provide very specific guidance in certain steps of this process. There's a lot of higher level guidance, but these cell notes are really important for something that's supremely local to whatever you happen to be working on at the time. So keep an eye out for those red triangles. Make sure you hover over and read those. And they're typically going to be great for clarifying instructions for exactly the part of the process you're at. Most of your work is going to be done in these yellow backgrounded fields. What you will see, and we'll look at here momentarily, is most of the data will be entered in cells that have yellow background and they have blue font color. So you will want to avoid touching anything outside of those yellow background cells, lest you happen to damage any of the other calculations, most of which are safely locked away, but just stick to those yellow fields. And then finally, we've got a naming convention we'd like you to use so that we can very quickly and easily identify your particular forgiveness data file. And it's laid out right here, your company name plus the last 4 digits of your bank loan number, plus the words forgiveness data, plus .xlsx. No spaces in there, please. You can see the example, it's very straightforward. You're gonna wanna save your work often, and please do save it with this naming convention. So this is your first peek at the data entry. We'll go through a few things on this slide. First up, column A, you will see detailed instructions for this tab. So you'll want to go through all of those. Yes, we're hitting you with all sorts of instructions, written instructions, video instructions, etc. They're all there to save you time. I know it takes a few minutes of investment to read them, but they're here to save you time. And once you've read those instructions, it'll be very clear what you need to fill in. I just mentioned on the prior slide the yellow backgrounded cells, and that's where you're going to want to be putting in your data. And you'll have columns for employee name and other things that are related to employees. And then you will start filling in columns worth of data. First up in the first grid here, the gross pay per employee per pay period grid, each column is its own pay period. So you will want to enter the, and these instructions are all in here, the total per pay period in the cell at the top, the date for the pay period, and then per employee per pay period, enter their gross salary. So that's the first table you'll encounter in this tab. The next grid, if you scroll to the right, and you'll want to continue scrolling to the right until you run out of tables here, but the next grid when you scroll to the right is a grid for hours paid for each employee through, well, there are actually multiple grids here. 2 of them are for 2 different date periods during 2019, and the third will be for hours from January 1st, 2020 through the end of your covered period. Note that the second of these 3 grids is to collect hours for seasonal employers. So if you're a seasonal employer, and you probably know who you are, you would put some employee related payroll period information in there for a certain 12-week period during 2019. If you are not a seasonal employer, you do not need to enter that information. Once again, all in the instructions, but if you're a seasonal employer, you will use that second hours grid. If you're not, skip it. And then finally, continue scrolling to the right, and you will get to the employer portion of medical benefits, and then separately from that, the employer portion of retirement contributions, and separately from that, the employer portion of state and local taxes. These are all for the covered period. Once again, unsurprisingly, there are instructions that are very specific. Just make sure you've read all of those instructions and your data entry should go smoothly.
John, that's a great overview, and we'll keep going through the rest of the model here in just a second, but I wanted to step in here to make a couple of points. One, there's a reason why we have to have this level of data. One, as John mentioned, the most of those summary level payroll reports, frankly, are wrong, and generally the errors we've seen would have cost the borrower a fair amount of money. We don't want that to happen for you. The other reason is the SBA is holding banks to a fiduciary level of review that includes verifying all of the calculations, which means being able to understand the data that goes into those calculations is correct. And that's why we need to have this level of information. The second thing that I want to clarify as well is that there's an awful lot of different look back periods that require this data based on those reduction factors that we spent quite a bit of time on in the earlier webinars. So the salary reduction factor, for example, requires you to include or exclude people based on their 2019 pay in any pay period. The FTE reduction factor has all these different look back periods. So we aren't asking for data that isn't required by the SBA, but it is required that we be able to have traceability through all this. So that's the reasoning behind all of this. The other thing that I'd like to spend a moment on is just to make sure that people understand an area that's been quite confusing as we've tried to explain it. We still get a lot of questions, and that is the incurred versus paid rules, so that you can, in fact, maximize your forgiveness and minimize any kind of rework because you didn't have the right information included. So real quickly, just kind of want to walk through a basic timeline for an 8-week borrower who got their loan on April 14th. That becomes day one of their 56-day covered period, which takes them through June 8th. Now this happens to be, in our example, a business that pays semi-monthly. They pay based on the first 15 days and the last 15 or 16 days of the month, but they don't actually pay on the 15th and the 31st. They pay about 5 or 6 days in arrears. So our sample business here incurred their payroll from the 1st to the 15th, paid it on around the 20th or 21st inside the covered period. Then they proceeded to have subsequent pay periods that were both incurred and paid in the covered period. You see payrolls 2, 3, and 4 all incurred and paid in the covered period. And then you get to payroll 5 that brackets the end of the covered period and is paid well past the end of the covered period. So what are the allowable expenses for forgiveness in this example? It's what you see here in black. It's from the beginning of that first payroll that was incurred because it was paid during the covered period. You get to take the entire incurred amount for payroll 1. On the back side, it works a little bit differently. Here you only get to take the amount that was incurred before the end of your covered period, so long as it was paid in the next regular pay cycle. So in this example, our borrower would be able to include the payroll of June 1st through June 8th that was incurred in payroll 5. So in total, as we use payroll costs as an example, they would go from April 1st through June 8th because of those incurred and or paid rules. Okay, so hopefully that helps to clarify. And John, this applies not only to payroll, but it also applies to all the non-payroll costs as well, right?
That's right.
All right, so let's walk through what the borrowers are going to have to do on the non-payroll costs.
All right, so tabs 4 through 7 are happily far more straightforward than those pay cycle input tabs. Tab 4 is for mortgage obligations, actually interest on covered mortgage obligations. What you'll notice here is up towards the top under the link that brings you back to the table of contents is a definition of covered mortgage obligations and then some instructions. So we've done that with each of these tabs 4 through 7 to make life easy on you. And this tends to be far more straightforward. Most companies have one location or a small number of locations. And a small number of mortgage obligations, et cetera, et cetera. So this tends to be a more straightforward part of the data input. So just make sure you walk through these 4 tabs, make sure you read the instructions very carefully so you know that you're not missing anything that could count towards your forgiveness. And for tab 7 in particular, owner's comp, read the instructions very carefully there because only some companies will be utilizing that tab. So there you go. Next up, tab 8. This is the tab for the portal data entry. And John mentioned this earlier. What you're doing is you're entering a bunch of data into the data entry tabs, and then beneath your data entry are a whole bunch of calculations. And they're creating results that your bank and the SBA want to see entered into their portal. So tab 8 is where we show you the data that you're going to use to enter data into the bank's portal. So this covers both the Schedule A and forgiveness application steps here. So let's go ahead and jump forward here. If you're using an older version of Excel, and I know John mentioned this earlier, some calculations may not display properly. And in that case, you'll actually see this very error message that we've gotten here. It's in gray. What we would ask you to do is enter a 0 in the accompanying field in the bank portal, and then just continue through the rest of your process of data entry from this tab 8 into your bank's portal. And you may have multiple errors. So once again, depends on your input and the vintage of Excel that you're using, but that's okay. We will come back to you later on in the process, but we do need you to get through this data entry in your bank's portal so that you can get to the place where you're also uploading all of your supporting docs. So this is it, enter 0, keep going. And here on the left-hand side, we've got an illustration of tab 8, and then on the right-hand side, you can see the workflow portal. And it is this easy. You're just taking the data and entering it one at a time, straightforward into the workflow portal.
Perfect. Great summary, John. Thank you very much. As we've said repeatedly, there's a lot to this, but we're trying to make it as easy as possible for you to be able to get through this process, not only through this webinar, but also a number of other resources that we have put together for you to be able to get through this process. So the first thing is when you download the model, there's also going to be a link to download a how-to video. And we encourage you to watch this video. It will go through in far more detail what John was just taking you through. I'm going to stop for about a minute here and show a brief clip so that you can get an idea of what's coming for you in this video, and it will walk through all of the details and show you exactly how to navigate this model.
So here's where you would start entering information employee by employee. So for instance, if John earns $1,500 per pay period, and you'll see the checksum actually throws an error, and that's because it's looking at $5,000 and $1,500 and noting that there's a $3,500 difference. Now you and I know that you're not done putting your information in yet, so let's add Jane Doe. And coincidentally, she makes $3,500 per pay period. So that evens us out. And you would simply continue on adding the employee level information in this part of the grid and the date and the total per payroll in this part of the grid. And hopefully you will soon be done. Once again, it will take you longer if you have more employees. Now this will cover a lot of pay periods depending on, and more depending on what pay cycle your company is on. If you need additional columns for more data entry, click the plus, and that opens up more columns so that you can easily have as many columns as you want and simply fill them up as necessary with your pay periods.
So that gives you a nice example of how the how-to video works. It runs about 25 minutes, but it will walk you through each step of the way. Also, you'll note that there's instructions you may have seen in that first column of that particular pay cycle worksheet that tells you everything else you'll need to know as you go through it. So in addition to the instructions in the workbook, we've got this how-to video, and on top of that, we've also got a complete user guide that we've put together that runs about 25 pages as well and walks through each step of the process as well, from what to have before you get started all the way through the data input in the various tabs and the tables within each of those tabs. And we've done this in very careful detail to be able to explain not only what needs to be done, but why it needs to be done in that fashion so that you've got a complete understanding. So all of these things are available to you to help you really understand exactly what to do with examples like this that shows where you're navigating to, what dates you need to be putting in, and where you need to be entering your data, and does this table by table, tab by tab through the entire workbook. Again, we strongly urge you not only to watch the video, but read this user guide, and you'll have a very clear understanding of exactly what needs to be done, rather than just jumping in and trying to figure it out as you go. It's much easier if you have that context before you begin. Okay, the third and final resource that I want to talk to you about is the FAQ library. Now, many of you have contributed to this with questions along the way, and we thank you for that. That library is now up over 300 questions, around 325 or so, and growing literally by the week. So please avail yourself of this FAQ library. Now, what you have seen on the website in the past has been a flat PDF document that was now more than 100 pages and rather laborious to work your way through. We are converting that, and we'll be releasing this here momentarily into a searchable web page that kind of works like a Google page might, that you are simply entering a keyword or two into the box that you see here in the middle where it says enter your question. Let's say, all right, let's type in lease payments, and you'll instantly get examples of the different questions that involve lease payments and the answers that go with those, so that you can do this for any keyword that's in any question. If you had typed equipment, you'd be getting that third one in that says, can payments for equipment leases be included? Or if you typed furniture, you'd get that second one. So it doesn't matter what the keyword is, it's going to search through and find those questions that are going to be relevant with those keywords in them to help you more quickly find the answers to the questions that you may have. But please make sure that you check the FAQs if you've got questions before you go down the next path, or review the user guide or the how-to video or this webinar or previous webinars. There's a lot of resources available for you to be able to get to the right answers to your questions that you may have. If you still have some questions left at the end of the day after checking through all those different resources, don't hesitate to contact your relationship manager at the bank, or you can use this email box for questions about the model itself. With that, we're going to wrap up this webinar. Matt and John, I'd really like to thank you for your contributions to helping people understand this, and I'd like to thank all of you for staying with us and listening to this webinar in our goal to make this as seamless and profitable of an experience for you as we possibly can. Thank you very much.